So the Browns have had an interesting 20 years of draft if you look at it from 1999 to 2019. So I wanted to look at this and kind of evaluate it on a deeper level, because sometimes I feel like with those drafts, we just lump them in as bad because we knew that the team was pretty terrible in that era. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to break this video into two parts. First part's going to go through till about 2011. Second part's going to deal with 2012 and after that. So this is the first part. But before I get into that, I want to make sure you guys hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, ding that notification bell so you can be notified when I upload. Also want to give a shout out to the patreon.com dog check tier members. I'm going to start with Michael Matique, Nick Merrick, Mike Lopau, Wes and Megan, Tyler Chiz, D.A. Jade, Easley Bash, Joe Hart, Gabriel Wilson, Fred Pratt III, David Valtiar, Relentless Buck, Chunt, Rex Kaufman, Kevin Johnson, DJ Marino V, Edward Carpenter, Matt H, Sign Sheets, Gemini, Liam Freeman, Fight Dirty 74, Yo, Matt Lloyd, Paul Wilcox, Hundo Magnifico, Kyle Stuffer, Lukey from Munich, Deveroff, J Guy 101, Musty Taco, Joe Bobby, Brad Cabo, Dylan W, James McGinley, Arenda Hall, Chad Gimme, David Maldonado, Dylan Hell, Josh Mendorch, Jaleel Salim Jr., Mark M, TJ Showman, Stuart Moore, Cleveland BCI, Robert Jermaine Jr., Dave, Mike May, Andrew Hirsch, Curtis Byer, Batman, Bharat Kumar, John Albert, Beerman069, Masayua Buzzer, Roland James, Nemo, Mac House, Reeve Hertz, Philip Wilcox, Marie Vivert, Sean Barron, Goggles Pisano, Corporal Nick Lopez, Dom Gazzulo, Nick Nasty, Ian Whitaker, Colin 216, Christian, Dave Strong, Michael Stone, Billy Moose Gentry, Austin Z, Mark Burnett II, Andre Griffin, Otis Wolf, Dog Pound, Kai Greg Ehlers, Austin Bolin, Lydia Mahawk, Jesus Serrano, Chris Foams, the Picktown Browns backers, Max Nilakenko, Mark Khan, Max Al Dojo, and Water Bear Marketing. Again, guys, thank you so much for the support. It means a ton. Now, let's talk about these draft classes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through pretty much 20 years of Cleveland Browns draft history. Obviously, I'm not going to rank 2020 or 2021 because I think it's far too early to rank those drafts. But I do think it's fair to go from everything from 1999 to 2019. So it's about 20 years of Cleveland Browns drafts to go through. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting things that we could discover, talk about, and that it's just going to be fun overall. So just to go over this, if you've never seen my tier list videos before, S tier means the best possible solution, right? Like you had one of the best drafts that you could have possibly had. A tier means really good. B tier means it was pretty good. C tier is average, right? It wasn't awful, but you didn't set the franchise back. D tier was pretty bad. You probably set the franchise back just a little bit. And F tier is one of the worst drafts of all time. So that is the relative ranking system that we're going to be using today. Now that we got that information out the way, let's jump into this. And we're going to start with the 1999 Cleveland Browns draft, which is a little infamous because it's the first draft back. You have to remember the Browns had the first pick in the draft this year. So they were the #1 team picking in every round. They had 1 first-round pick, 2 second-round picks, 2 third-round picks, and 3 sixth-round picks. So they had a bevy of picks to their disposal, and they selected with those picks in the first round Tim Couch, Kevin Johnson in the second round, who turned out to be pretty decent as a wide receiver, Raheem Abdullah, who never really did much, Dalen McCutcheon, who was a good solid corner for the Browns for many years, Marquise Smith, Wally Rayner, Darren Chiaverini, Marcus Spriggs, Kendall Ogie, James Durf, and Madre Hill. So not a lot of hits in this draft class, and not a lot of hits at all in this draft class. It's really just Kevin Johnson was the best player. Tim Couch, you can argue, was a lot better than his circumstances allowed him to be, but still not really a great argument that was a great pick. I don't think anything in this draft set the franchise back. So it's not F or D tier. I'll put it in C tier. It just wasn't a great draft. Now, you could argue that this kind of set the foundation for the next 20 years. I would disagree with that. I don't think one bad, mediocre draft as an expansion team is what set this team up for so many years of mediocrity. I think that it was just a mediocre draft followed up by decades of mediocre drafts, and really that's what set the franchise back, not necessarily this draft, because it really wasn't that bad. And when Tim Couch is the argument for it being set back, and Tim Couch was bad, but you can pretty much see that he was in a no-win situation. I don't know what else you could say here. And also you can make the argument that they missed out on Donovan McNabb. Now let's move on to the 2000 draft. Also, one thing I want to point out here, why did the NFL stop doing these personalized per year draft logos, right? Where it's like all fun and then it gets super homogenized by 2004. But you would think with them bringing back the draft and moving it around and putting it to different cities that they would start having fun with the logos again. Maybe they'll do that again. I don't know, but come on, man. This is super boring the way they have the logos now compared to what they used to do with the logos. Wish they would bring that back. So the 2000 draft, the Browns had a ton of picks, even more than they had in the expansion draft. So they had the first pick of the first round, obviously, number 1 overall pick. They had 2 third-round picks, 2 fourth-round picks, 2 fifth-round picks, 2 sixth-round picks, and 3 seventh-round picks. Let's see how many studs they ended up with. Courtney Brown, who kind of stunk. He kind of stunk. Dennis Northcutt, who was actually pretty good, a really good punt returner. Just somebody that the fans always were at odds with because he would drop balls more consistently than you would want to. He was kind of the David Njoku of his era. Travis Prentice, 200 career yards, so definitely didn't get your money's worth there. Juwan Dawson, who wasn't that good either. Lewis Sanders. Aaron Shea, who I would contend was a pretty good blocking tight end in his day. I think he gave the Browns 5 solid years. He was a second or third tight end option. 4th round, second pick in the 4th round. I think that's fair. Anthony Marlborough, Lamar Chapman. Spurgeon Wynn out of Texas State, a quarterback in the 6th round. 17 picks before Tom Brady would eventually be selected by the New England Patriots, which, you know, is an L, but who would have known at the time, right? Brad DeBell didn't end up really playing for the Browns. Manuel Saveva, Eric Chandler, Rasheed Barnes. So not a great draft here either. A lot of picks, a lot of misses. I mean, when you're arguing that like Aaron Shea and Dennis Northcutt are your best picks, I think you did an arguably worse job here than you did the year before. This draft was a complete miss. I mean, LeVar Arrington went number 2. He wasn't like a world beater. He was a really good player for a long time in the NFL, but he would have been much better than Courtney Brown. They were teammates in college. The Browns just picked the wrong teammate. So that's unfortunate. And, you know, a couple more misses. I mean, Brian Urlacher did go in that draft. He is a Hall of Famer, so there's that as well. This is a much worse draft, I believe, than 99. 99, they look at your first year in, and you didn't do terrible, right? Kevin Johnson was actually decent. Tim Couch, you can make the argument, could have been much better, but he wasn't allowed to under his circumstances. There is no argument that Courtney Brown could have been better given his circumstances. He was just injured all the time. And even when he was healthy, he wasn't great. And then everybody else is just kind of really bad. I mean, this is another year where you've had the top pick in the first round, and you kind of just squandered it awfully. So this is a D. This didn't set the franchise back, but it was a pretty dookie draft. It was a pretty dookie draft. All right, let's move on to 2001. Browns had the 3rd pick overall this year, and they had a normal allotment of picks, except for they had 2 7th-round picks. Let's see what they got here. Gerard Warren, who you can make a better argument for, was actually decent, but not 3rd overall good. Quincy Morgan, they had a run for 3 years in a row where they just were drafting wide receivers in the 2nd round. Now, Quincy Morgan had, I believe, like 1 really good year as a pro, and then more inconsistent years. Another guy who could not consistently catch the football, along with Dennis Northcutt, which had to be fun for Browns fans at the time. James Jackson, who was not that great of a running back. Anthony Henry, who I believe was a decent defensive back for the Browns for quite a while. Jeremiah Farnes, Michael Jamison, Paul Kaczynskis, didn't play that much. Andre King. All right, so this is a pretty nothing draft. This is an easy C tier right here. You know, your hits aren't that high, but your misses, they're not as costly. You can make the argument they missed out on LaDainian Tomlinson. They missed out on a lot of guys. Look, if we do this for every draft that the Browns had in this era about who they missed out on, we're going to be here forever. Because let's be honest, you don't have 20 years of mediocrity without consistently missing on guys that you should have hit on, especially with the caliber of pick that you had. And also, I'm going to call out this weird 2nd round trend, right, where they just kept going after wide receivers and just could not land one. I mean, Chad Johnson was in the 2nd round of this draft. They went with Quincy Morgan instead. So Yeah, that's a big miss right there. The next question. So in 2002, the Browns had the 16th pick. They went with William Green, Andre Davis, the wide receiver, Melvin Fowler, Kevin Bentley, Ben Taylor, Darnell Sanders, Andrea Davis, the linebacker, and Jaquin Gonzalez. So Andre Davis, the linebacker, on the team literally forever. He was actually a pretty good pick, especially considering you got him in the 5th round. So that was a hit. William Green, not as good as we ever thought he was going to be, but, ended up being pretty decent, I guess. Not worth the 16th overall pick, though. Andre Davis, the wide receiver, kind of a disappointing career here. Was always a solid wide receiver, just never who you would expect it. And again, man, another 2nd round wide receiver. The Browns drafted 4 wide receivers in the 2nd round in a row in their first 4 drafts and had absolutely no aces in that order and had absolutely no aces in that era. Like, they were awful at wide. They weren't great at wide receiver, but yet they kept spending there. So that's just bad management at this point. Again, this is a pretty nothing draft. It wasn't good, but it wasn't bad enough to set the franchise back. So I'm going to give it a C tier. The next draft, 2003, the Browns actually made the playoffs this year, so they had the 21st pick. And they drafted Jeff Fain. So they drafted Jeff Fain, Sean Thompson, Chris Crocker, Lee Suggs, who's interesting, Ryan Pointbriand, who was I believe the long snapper forever for the team, Michael Lehan, and Antonio Gagari. All right, so Jeff Fain, I believe, was actually the center on this team for quite a while, so 21st pick. That's fine. Sean Thompson's always somebody who could have been better, wasn't, average. It's pretty much what they do in the 2nd round in this era. Chris Crocker had a long stint in the NFL, so it wasn't the worst pick ever. Lee Suggs was somebody who was supposed to be really good coming out of Virginia Tech, had his ups and downs, showed a lot of potential when he was in Cleveland, just couldn't stay healthy, and then he had some other health issues later on in his career. I think this is another kind of nothing draft where they didn't really gain anything. They didn't really lose anything. I don't think they made the biggest mistakes in the world, like we're going to talk about once we get into some of these 2010 drafts. But, overall, this is a pretty bad draft, so I'm going to put it in D tier. The next draft is the 2004 draft. Browns had the 6th pick. This is where they picked Kellen Winslow, Sean Jones, Luke McCown, Amon Gordon, Kirk Chambers, and Aminichobe Ekemondu out of California. This is a pretty bad draft. Now, I don't know how much it set the franchise back, so I don't know if I'm going to give it F tier or anything like that. But I think this is the tipping point of just bad drafts. I don't know if this is the worst draft that the Cleveland Browns have had. And you can make the argument that Kellen Winslow was a huge part of the 10-6 year that the Browns had and that he wasn't that bad of a pick. But with that considered, this was the year that Ben Roethlisberger was available. They didn't take him. They went with Kellen Winslow, stuck with Tim Couch, even though they're going to get rid of Tim Couch for Jeff Garcia. So, again, not great decisions made there. And then, honestly, if you wanted tight end play and you wanted a good tight end, Ben Watson ended up going 32nd overall. He ended up being a much better tight end than Kellen Winslow. So you can't even say with the 6th pick that really hit that well. And then everybody else in this draft, just kind of nothing, right? Luke McCown, Sean Jones, Amon Gordon, like nobody of note on this team. This is another D-tier draft. This is just not good. All right, now we're going to move to the 2005 draft, the Braylon Edwards draft. The Browns had the 3rd pick in this year's draft, and this is actually, I would make the argument, a decent draft, right? You get Braylon Edwards in the 1st round. Look, he wasn't awesome. Nobody's going to make the argument that Braylon Edwards lived up to that pick. But considering that, like, nobody else from that draft really lived up to their hype, I mean, this is the draft that Troy Williamson and Mike Williams came out of, Matt Jones. So you can make the argument that he was probably the better wide receiver he was probably the 2nd best wide receiver in this round outside of Roddy White that got selected. So you didn't miss terribly there if you really wanted a star wide receiver, which at this time, I mean, if you look at the draft history, they had drafted a lot of wide receivers up until this point. They were desperate. Brodney Poole was actually a pretty decent corner for the Browns or safety for the Browns for quite a while. Charlie Fry, he played. He wasn't good. We know what that is. David McMillan, and Antonio Perkins, Nick Spiegel. Look, none of these guys behind them are good, but this is more hits than they're used to. So I'm going to say this is probably the best draft they had since coming back, which is pretty sad. But yeah, this goes C tier here. 2006 draft, they had the 13th pick. They went with Cameron Wembley with the 13th overall pick in the first round. DeQuell Jackson, Travis Wilson, Leon Williams, Isaiah Souls, Jerome Harrison, DeMario Minter, Lawrence Vickers, and Babatunde Ushinowu. So, this is actually a pretty decent draft. Cameron Wembley, I think he had like 12 sacks his rookie year and he kind of petered out after that. Solid player. The other ends that went that year were Tamba Hali and Manny Lawson. So, yeah, you missed, but you didn't miss that hard. DeQuell Jackson on the team forever, in the league forever, and was a longtime linebacker for this team. Jerome Harrison set several records for the Cleveland Browns in single game status. He was a really good, really fast running back. Never a number one guy, but you got him in the 5th round, so I think you got what you wanted out of him. And Lawrence Vickers, for a period of time, was the best fullback in the NFL. So you know what? This is the first B-tier draft the Cleveland Browns have had since they came back in 1999. These are some awful drafts, by the way, that they have had. Not as awful or as bad as some of the decision-making later on in the Browns franchise history, but pretty just mediocre drafts so far. 2007, this is the year they got Joe Thomas, 3rd overall, Brady Quinn, Eric Wright, Brandon McDonald, Malia Purcell, Chase Pittman, and Cindric Steptoe. So the only hit here is Joe Thomas, but Joe Thomas is quite literally a Hall of Famer. So best draft they've had so far. So 2006, 2007, things are looking good. Then 2008 comes. Look, they traded all their picks away the year previous to kind of get Brady Quinn to kind of land some of these guys. So in 2008, they didn't really have a lot of picks. They got Bo Bell, Martin Rucker, Atiyah Rubin, Paul Hubbard, and Alex Hall. And Atiyah Rubin was actually a really good player for quite a while in the NFL. So being that this is a pick where you've had 2 4th-round picks, 2 6th-round picks, and a 7th-round pick, and that was pretty much it, you got Atiyah Rubin out the deal. Hey, man, that's a B-tier draft. That wasn't terrible. So things were looking up in this 2006 to 2007 and 2008 portion of the Cleveland Browns history. And I think things even got a little bit better when you get to 2009 and 2010, because this team did start to show competence in these last few years where they had some solid drafts, some solid players get brought on the roster. We're going to go with 2009 where they had 3 second-round picks. They started with Alex Mack, who turned out to be a really good center. Brian Robisky, who turned out to be a bust. Muhammad Massaquoi, who turned out to be a bust. David Vicuni, who turned out to be a bust. Kaluka Maeva, Don Carey, Coy Francis, James Davis. This is a pretty bad draft, but at least they got Alex Mack. So that's the only thing keeping it out of D tier. So they're going to go C tier here. I think it's better than the 2002 draft and the 2001 draft and the 99 draft, but I think it is worse than 2006. So I'm going to put that here. Then we're going to move to 2010, which is a legitimately good draft. They got Joe Hayden, TJ Ward, Montario Hardesty, who was on the team for a little bit, but he wasn't ever good. Colt McCoy, who's still in the league. Sean Laval, who's a pretty good guard. Larry Asante, Carlton Mitchell, who's famous for a rant, and Clifton Gaithers. So, yeah, pretty decent draft. I'm going to put this up here in B tier. You got Joe Hayden, who was a franchise cornerstone for quite a while. TJ Ward, who was a really good safety for a long time in the NFL. I think these were some really solid picks. And then the last draft that we're going to go through in part 1 is the 2011 draft. Phil Taylor, Jabbar Sheard, Greg Little, Jordan Cameron, Owen Marisic, Buster Skrine, Jason Pinkston, Eric Hack. Okay, so 2011 is a tricky year to look at, right? Because if you just look at it on paper, it's a good draft. If you look at it in context, it's a bad one, right? Because in 2011, we went Phil Taylor, Jabbar Sheard, Greg Little, Jordan Cameron, Owen Marisic, Buster Skrine, Jason Pinkston, Eric Hack. Now, Phil Taylor, Jabbar Sheard, Jordan Cameron, Buster Skrine all became pretty decent NFL players in their own right. The problem is, this is the same year of the Julio Jones trade. And that was a huge, huge mistake. So while this draft is good in 2011, the mistake of the Julio Jones trade is something that haunted this franchise for legitimately the next 5 years. So it has to be D tier. It's not an awful draft per se. It's just the one decision that was made in there was so bad and set the franchise back for so long. And I even did a video way, way back in the day, I believe like 4 or 5 years ago, on why and how that draft and that trade set the Browns back. But it is a pretty decent draft, so that's going to keep it out of F tier. Anything less than this draft, and it would have been F tier. But we're going to see in the next 8 or 9 drafts how badly this set the Browns back. But that's it for part 1. Make sure you guys check out part 2. And again, guys, thank you for watching. Have a great day. Have a good night.